Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis and initiative of the UPSConline.com and Ambition IS. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 2nd of January 2018. So coming to the first article, this is an article on the editorial page of the Hindu and it is read as the secular condition. The opinion is that to fully understand what secularism in the Indian context means, we must read the constitution in its entirety. Now, the context of this article is basically the recent speech given by the Minister of State for Employment and Skill Development, Mr. Anant Kumar Hegde, on the 24th of December. He has given some loose comments and which say that the secular people, do not have an identity of their parental blood, and the BJP, he said, is here to change the constitution. So these remarks, these irresponsible remarks by an authority of the Minister of State himself, is somehow been criticized all across the media. So that is the context of this article. However, a word of caution in this case is that you should not adopt such statements directly in your paper. I mean, even if you have to criticize the person, you must criticize him as a political person, or for that matter a minister. That is the way you should do it, rather than naming the person himself. Also, the article is largely a critique specifically of the government and its policies, but some relevant analysis on secularism has been drawn, so I shall be focusing on that rather than the criticism of the government, because that is the political aspect of the article. So coming to the secularism part, coming to some background about secularism. Now, you have to understand that in the constitution, initially the word secular was not a part of the constitution, and it was later added in the preamble in the year 1976, which is also the year where emergency was at its peak, because emergency was from 1975 to 77. So at that point of time, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act was passed. Now, the first and foremost issue is that this 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, because it was passed at the time of emergency, itself is a very controversial one. It is often termed as a mini constitution in itself, because a large number of changes were added to the constitution, and one amongst them was the addition of the word socialist and secular to the preamble. So many a times experts have questioned the the intention behind adding these words to the constitution, and that is why since then there has been some degree of conflict and controversy over these words in the constitution. So that is the entire background of this issue. Now, some good analysis on secularism that have been brought about are, first and foremost, there is a need for building a public opinion against any attempt to thwart constitutional values of plurality and tolerance within the country. And this includes not only attempts to change the constitution or amend the constitution. That would be something that is internal. For that, enough safeguards are there. We have a basic structure in the constitution, where you cannot amend the constitution. But the issue is that these attempts by politicians amount to external influences on undermining the basic core principles of the constitution. So the author here in the editorial is advocating that all attempts need to be made to prevent such external attacks on the constitution as well. So that is the first issue. The second issue is that the term secular, as I had mentioned, was initially not a part of the constitution. So many people criticize the fact that this term had been deliberately ignored by the Constituent Assembly. So the author here brings about an analysis that the term was not something that was deliberately ignored by the Constituent Assembly. Rather, it was something that they took for granted. They said that India's secular status is well enshrined in its fundamental rights, like the right to equality, the right to freedom of religion and conscience, which cannot occur in an unsecular state. So secularism was something that the constitution makers thought was inbuilt in the foundations of the constitution itself and the idea of democracy. So merely mentioning it just for the heck of it, was something that the Constituent Assembly avoided. And this, the editorial brings about a fact that this perception that it was not a part of the initial constitution is something that is being misrepresented and misinformed about. So that is another analysis. Also, a good analysis has been drawn about the type of secularism in India. A question has in the past come in the UPSC that how is India's secularism different from the secularism in US? So Indian secularism is something unique, and what it is, that is being explained. Now, at the time of the constitution making, a question was raised as to what kind of secularism policy should the government follow. So it was decided that one opinion was that first, a complete wall should exist between the state and the religion. This is the policy followed in US. However, another opinion was given that the state should treat every religion with equal respect. And it should not be a complete demarcation between religion and state, rather, equal equality and equal treatment of all the religions by the state should be the policy. So, in the aftermath of all debates, the second opinion was accepted by the constitution makers. Then he has given a good analysis of the constitutional expert, Mr. K.M. Munshi, who said that non-establishment clause of the US secularism is different in the case of India, which he said has a different character, and India has a secularism which is known as something called Indian secularism. Now, what are the different characteristics of Indian secularism? First and foremost, Indians are people with deeply religious moorings. This is one thing very unique to India. Also, India has had a living tradition of religious tolerance, because even before we were not a country, we have had various religions living in this country and living in harmony. So tolerance is something that is not something that has been superimposed on us, but rather it has been our heritage. Also, there's a broad outlook in the most dominant religion of the country, that is Hinduism. There is a broad outlook that all religions lead to the same God. So this is another thing which sets apart Indian secularism compared to other countries. Also, India follows a distance, something called as a principled distance. This is a key word. A principled distance from religion is something that the Indian state maintains. Thus, the state can intervene in a particular religion, provided it is within the limitations provided by the constitution and it is in line with forwarding constitutional principles. The state can also discriminate between two religions, provided if it is promoting freedom, equality, or any other value integral to the to the principles of the constitution. In such a scenario, the government does interfere within different religions. So these are some good analysis on the secularism in India, and the last opinion is definitely that secularism is the most important requirement for survival of any plural society. So that's about this article. Coming to the next article, ethics of excellence. Now the opinion is that improving academic research needs to be a wide-ranging project. That is, this is also the context of the article. So since past few weeks we are discussing the editorials, and I have seen a pattern is there of improvement in research in the country and institutions in the country. So this is another article in that line. Coming to the issues that are important in this article are, first and foremost, making academic research in India internationally competitive and institutions featuring in ranking lists should be a priority for the government. Also, the global research is becoming much more competitive, and India is lacking in that. The spirit of global competition in our academic research institution is something that is not being reflected. The world is moving at much faster pace. Also, there are cases where countries like China are offering blank checks to scientists to come and join them for cutting edge research work. So this kind of spirit is not being seen in India. Another thing is that despite the achievements in expanding several institutions, efforts of increasing the quality are needed. So definitely there is an expansion of large number of institutions which are mentioned here. All of that is there, but the quality of research in this institution is something that has almost stagnated. Further, the issue is not only about blaming governments and bureaucrats, because that is the general trend in the public, that whenever they have to criticize research work, focus is largely upon blaming the government for lack of funds, or for bureaucrats for slow decision making within these institutions. But the issue is that an internal check has to be brought within these institutions and upon the academia that is involved in these institutions. This is the point that the author is trying to bring, that they need to have a higher degree of commitment to excellence, which is not coming within these institutions. So rather than simply focusing outside the institution, some focus has to be brought within also. Also, the global practice of sincere and stated commitment to cultivating excellence as a goal compared to academic ethos in India is something that is important. India has never been focusing on excellence, rather it is rather more concerned about academics, which is not the global practice. Also, international institutions consider, the loss of a candidate to a rival institution as a serious failure. This spirit is again missing in India, which is continuously losing its talent in the form of brain drain, and which has emerged as a major problem for India, as majority of the scientists globally are coming from India itself, but the research in India is way behind these countries. So that is a major issue. Also, in India, excellence is merely one amongst the multiple criteria that would be required for hiring a person in an institution, and some extraneous considerations are being given more emphasis upon. This is not the issue in foreign countries, where focus is basically on excellence of a person, on the merit of a person. Caste, creed, corruption in employments and corruption in appointment is something that is not happening in global institutions, says the author. Also, in India, the leaders of these institutions largely are following a personality cult, which the author is saying is highly detrimental to these institutions, because leadership in these institutions should be based upon performance rather than achievements of past, which develop a person's personality and later makes them a bureaucrat in that institution. That is what the author is trying to bring about, that this should be avoided, and continuously leadership should be transformed in depending upon the achievements of a particular scientist. So that is the opinion he has given. Also, there is a conflict of interest often that is arising within these institutions, as there can be partisan support for one's own subject of interest. Suppose a person who's heading a science institution is maybe a major in a particular subject like physics, so he can you have a partisan interest or conflict of interest where he is favoring more research in physics. So that those are issues that he has brought about. Also, he said that another major problem with the Indian institutions is that there is an ignorance towards globally important research areas. So this alignment with important research areas globally is something that is very much needed in the Indian scenario. The author has given some suggestions for improvement. The first is that there is a need to change the political culture of the country, because the culture is largely intended towards politicizing even science. So this is something that needs to change. Also, bringing reforms from within the academic institutions, like I mentioned before. Also, there is a need for articulating the goal of excellence, which is something that is constantly missing in all the institutions. Also, prohibiting personality cults, like I mentioned above. Also, evaluation of leaders by their funding and accreditation agencies is something that can be looked into for improving leadership, improving competence in these institutions. So that's the summary of this article. With this, coming to the next article, Seize the Asian Century. This is an important article on the editorial page of Hindu again. The opinion that the author has given is that the old economic order is dead, but India and China must take the lead to preserve its successes. Now, the context of this article is that recently, we all know that the WTO ministerial meet was held at Buenos Aires, and it was largely, a dead end to this meet. This was marked by US leading a general apathy towards, the free trade and globalization. So this is the entire context of this article. Now, the author has brought about some good background, where he says that 2017 will be remembered for the year when liberal economic consensus on free markets and globalization was finally buried in its homeland, that is the US and the UK. Why? Because the US in the post-Trump era has adopted a policy of anti-globalization, of protectionism. Also, the UK in the post-Brexit era has supported these anti-globalization movements and anti-immigration intentions. So these were the countries where open borders or free trade was something that was given birth to. And these are the countries where now it is coming to an end. So the question arises that is it the end of free world for the entire world, or is it, a country specific case for US and UK itself? That is the basic question which has been arisen. Now, an analysis of this question has been brought about, and what are the pros and cons of this scenario. So coming to the major issues, first and foremost, we all know that there is an ideological and policy shifts in the post-Trump America and the post-Brexit Britain. Now, in the context of the emerging economy, since mid 1980s, definitely, previously World Inequality Report, we had discussed an article which said that how inequality had risen, but the author brings about an analysis that since the 1980s, since the economic reforms, the people lifted out of abject and absolute poverty has been maximum in India and China. And this has been a historic event because never in history have so many people, been raised out of poverty. So that is one issue. So definitely some credit for this has to go to the economically liberal policies, says the author. Now, this article, basically, I would like to give you a disclaimer that this article is largely one which is a criticism of anti-globalization and a pro for globalization. So that is the entire view in this article. So the bent of arguments will be in the favor of globalization throughout. Now, another issue is that because of benefits of globalizations, these countries like the US and UK are today walking out of their previous opinions, but however, they should not outrightly reject the benefits which globalization has brought to even these countries. He says that in an analysis of the disadvantages of globalization in the US and the UK, they have largely, focused and shifted their focus on the prime culprits as freedom of trade and freedom of movement of immigrants. Whereas the author has brought out an analysis that it is not that freedom of trade and freedom of immigration of free movement of people which is the primary culprit. Rather, the primary culprit is the Wall Street and the global finance. Now, the Wall Street, for those of you who do not understand, the Wall Street is the financial capital of New York. It's in New York. It's a street in New York. It has all the financial services of the US, so that is where the financial stock exchange of US is homed. That is why it's called the Wall Street. So that's the whole background to it. Now, it is because of the global finance and these Wall Street finance services which led to the 2008 crisis, and it is in the aftermath of this 2008 financial crisis that criticism for globalization has been echoed in these countries. But the author says that the focus is that because these powerful lobbies are difficult to target, so the politics in these countries is largely targeting the soft targets, which is free trade and free immigration. Further, the author says that this is something of a non-acknowledgement of the benefits these free trade and free immigration has brought to these countries. For example, free trade has resulted in cheaper products and services to the consumers in these countries. Also, if there is a freedom of movement and immigration has been allowed by these countries, then the skill set that the diaspora has brought to these countries is something that is beyond exemplary. Even like, for example, Indian scientists who have gone in US have brought great research work in the US. So if altogether today US stands against immigration, then it negates the benefits that it has already incurred because of these past policies. Also, he says that any backlash of free trade and immigration will hurt the economic and geopolitical interests of both the US and the UK. Further, he says in the context of the developing countries like India, a closed world will be something similar to a large plethora of missed opportunities. Therefore, there is a great stake for India in having an open world. That is the opinion that the author is bringing. Further, he says that the backlash for free trade, in developing countries will largely stems from crony capitalism within these countries rather than external situation. Now, definitely there is a global spirit against globalization. One cannot deny that. Not only in the US and the UK, in other countries, in various European countries, also in India. For example, the recent World Inequality Report itself, brought to the fore. Many articles were written in that respect, that how economic reforms have damaged India, how inequality has widened. All of those things, and that sentiment of anti-globalization is there in India as well. But the author says that even in these developing countries, this sentiment is not because of external situations, rather because of internal problems of crony capitalism. So if one needs to mitigate this anti-globalization sentiment, the focus of the countries should be on doing away with these internal problems of corruption and crony capitalism, and ensuring free market. That will ensure that the citizenry in every country will regain its trust in free trade and free markets. That is what the author is trying to bring about. Further, he says that India should aim to expand its global market. Why? Because at present, India's share in the global market is only 1.6%. Also, with India's initiatives like Make in India, India is aiming to become a manufacturing hub. In that scenario, India can aim at having a larger global market share, but this is only possible if free trade is allowed. So it is very much in India's interest to promote free trade. Further, he says that in comparison to China, a situation is being built where the wage rate in China is largely increasing. Also, China is shifting its policy from an export-led country to a consumption driven economy. In that context, a vacuum is going to be created, and it is this vacuum which India can plug. So again, free trade is something which India can very much benefit from, and it is India is at the pinnacle of the opportunity to benefit from free trade. So that is another opinion that the author has given. Now, coming further, he says that better engagement for between both India and China is something that is the need of the hour. Also, other platforms like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the BBIN, which is the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, the BIMSTEC, these groups can act as platforms for a free trade. Even if US and UK are going in for a shutdown, or they are going in for more protectionist policies, focus can be on an Asian century, is what the author is trying to bring about. So he's saying, in the end, the opinion that he's given, that for an Asian century, India and China and other countries should look beyond rivalry and defensiveness, which is being adopted by these countries like the US and UK, and should explore possibilities of economic integration. That is the opinion that the author has held. So this is a good article in terms of India's interest in free trade, and also important from anti-globalization and globalization debate point of view. So that's about this. Coming to the next article, unseemly haste. Now, this is just an update article because I have discussed many articles on triple talaq, and largely the opinions given in this article are also the same. That definitely this is the legislation on the Muslim women protection of rights on marriage bill, which has been passed recently by the Lok Sabha. This is, the author says, a hasty bill. Also, issues and contradictions like how can you criminalize something that is actually not an act in itself, that is not acknowledged. For example, triple talaq, here the author says again that talaq-e-biddat is something that will not result in a talaq. Then how can you criminalize it? That is the first question. Also, where does the question of custody and subsistence allowance to the wife come into question, when talaq in itself is not happening by this mere utterance of talaq. So that is the issue that the author has brought about. This is a repetition of the past articles. What is new in this article, for which I have kept it for discussion, is this aspect of the article. Now, the bill has been brought about in the parliament in the context that the Supreme Court judgment of August had declared talaq-e-biddat of triple talaq as unconstitutional and against the rights of the Muslim women. So this is the argument given by the politicians, that it is in line with the judgment of the Supreme Court that they have brought about this legislation. Now, the author has brought about a good analysis here, that this is not something of a collaboration between the parliament and the judiciary. Why? Because the judiciary had restrained from telling the parliament to make a law in this regard, firstly. So the claims by the government that it is doing this in line with Supreme Court's order is something not acceptable, because the Supreme Court has given no such order, firstly. Another thing that the author has brought about is that though he has focused a little bit on the political aspects of it, I will not go and delve into that. The fact that the author is trying to communicate that many a times the Supreme Court has explicitly asked the government to go into making certain legislations. For example, in the Vishakha case judgment, the Supreme Court had told the government to go ahead and make a legislation on sexual harassment at workplace. However, in that case, it took the government 16 years to make that legislation. Further, in a court case, in a recommendation from the court in 1995 to amend the rules of evidence to better address cases involving custodial deaths has still not been implemented by the government. No legislation has been made. So why is it that in this case, despite the court not asking, the government has rushed into making this legislation? Not only that, the government has denied request by the opposition to send the bill to the standing committee on the grounds that the bill is needed, the law in this regard is needed at urgency. So that is a good de novo aspect that the author has brought about in this article, which you need to understand. The author is trying to say that definitely there are some malified intentions here. So that aspect I would suggest that you shouldn't go into, but definitely this relation between judiciary and executive is important in this case. So coming to the next article, the money trail. Now, this is an article on the recent issue of cryptocurrencies. Now, the context is that the Finance Ministry and the RBI have issued warnings against investing in cryptocurrencies and bitcoins. That is the entire context of this article. The opinion that the author has given is that there is a need for more investor awareness on cryptocurrencies. Now, coming to some background of this article. First and foremost, you need to understand something called digital currencies. Now, what is a digital currency? A digital currency is a type of currency available in a digital form and not a physical form. For example, you have your mobile wallets, you have your money, in the modern times, there's something called Airtel money or Paytm money. So this is something called digital currency because it is on an electronic device and you do not have physical money like notes or coins. So this is what is digital currency. Now, digital currency can be of two types. One, it could be a centralized one, and secondly, it could be a decentralized one. If it is a centralized one, then it is regulated by a government. It is regulated by a central bank. For example, Paytm money, it has the rupee as its currency. So this is a government approved digital currency. That is one aspect. Now, what is happening is that a government approved or a decentralized currency is something that has come up in the modern times. This is what the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies are. First and foremost, you should understand that what are the two types of these decentralized digital currencies. First is the virtual currency. A virtual currency is nothing but an unregulated digital money which is issued and used and controlled by a specific virtual community. That is virtual currency. Another type of decentralized digital currency is cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency is a digital asset designed to work as a medium of exchange that uses cryptography to secure its transactions, to control creation of additional units, verify the transfer of assets. Now, in simplest of terms, that cryptocurrency will be a currency which uses cryptography, and cryptography is nothing but secret codes. Whenever a transaction is taking place, it is based on some secret codes. So that is what is cryptocurrency. A type of cryptocurrency is Bitcoin. Now, this Bitcoin was some background for Bitcoin. Bitcoin was something that was invented in 2009 in Japan. Also, the Bitcoin is the first decentralized digital currency, and it is without a central bank or a single administrator. Now, whenever these Bitcoin transaction takes place, it takes place through something called as a blockchain. These are some keywords that are used in the article, so I'm explaining them. What is a blockchain? A blockchain is a public ledger. A ledger would be a computer file that records Bitcoin transactions. Now, these Bitcoins are basically being digital currencies will be working on a software. Now, what happens is that whenever there is a transaction in Bitcoin, the software immediately records this transaction through into a computer file. This computer file is known as a blockchain. So this is the entire background of digital currencies and the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. Now, what are the issues that are involved around these currencies? First and foremost issue is that this has emerged as an attractive investment with little knowledge. That is one primary concern. Secondly, there is a 1000% rise in the price of the bitcoins. This is an issue, that the immediate price rise, the remuneration of investing in bitcoins is very, very high. So definitely it is becoming a attractive choice for investment. Also, there is a lot of volatility in speculations. So people are, at present the bitcoins are rising, the price is rising, but this being a very, very volatile currency, it can happen that the price can suddenly fall also. So the risk involved is very high. Another thing is that there is very low awareness regarding the, verifying the genuineness of a cryptocurrency. In the aftermath of Bitcoin and the success of Bitcoin, many more cryptocurrencies have emerged, but there is no knowledge about which of these is genuine. And as per the admittance by various cryptocurrency operators in India, 90% of them are largely scams. That is an analysis brought about in the editorial. Also, global tech firms like the IBM are developing their own cryptocurrency platforms to speed up cross-border transaction in a secure and transparent manner. So definitely this is something of the future. I would suggest that despite these warnings issued against the Bitcoin, whenever an opportunity is provided, you should not take an entirely negative stand against this technology, because this can be a technology of the future and it does have certain positives to it, which I shall be discussing further. So you have to be open about that. Also, in countries like the US and UK, the intensive scrutiny over these currencies is something that is being done. Also, various regulations are coming. So that is the international scenario related to these currencies. Now, issues with cryptocurrencies in India, first and foremost, like I had discussed, that there's lack of knowledge amongst the people. Another issue is that cryptocurrency is not in line with the government's endeavors to curb black money. It can act as a source of, thrashing or for that matter, investing black money into the cryptocurrency. So that is something that the government is really worried about and is cautious about. Another thing is that in the future, some benefits related to cryptocurrencies are being examined, like I mentioned in the case of IBM. Also, there is a possibility that cryptocurrency can be used as a medium to increase ease of doing business, as companies can use it for international exchange. So that is a good option. That is a positive side of these currencies. These cryptocurrencies actually help in streamlining the payment mechanisms and make it more transparent. So that is the advantage of cryptocurrencies. So that's about this article. The advantages and disadvantages I've discussed. That's about this. Coming to the next article. Creative curbs. The Padmavati episode will further push filmmakers towards self-censorship. Now, I have discussed articles on the Padmavati issue, so this is not a very important article. Only 2 points in this article I found important, for which I've kept it. The first point is that of something called self-censorship. Of self-censorship or a fear that is going to come in the creative instincts of filmmakers is a good point that this article has brought about. This I would suggest whenever you are analyzing, you should bring this about, that such kind of actions by the government where freedom of speech is being curbed. In such a scenario, even if in the future the government takes a loosely free role for freedom of speech, or for that matter a more generous role by the government, in that scenario also that it will result in something of a self-censorship, which is not a welcome precedence in any democracy. Firstly, that. Another thing is that he has brought about an analysis that the name of the movie has been changed from Padmavati to Padmavat. This, he says, he's brought about a feminist approach in this, and he said that the change of the title takes away the agency from the filmmaker, but the character itself, it impacts the female dominant role that the movie was aiming at projecting. Also, there is a song in this movie where criticism has been raised that the actress is dancing without a ghungat. So such kind of cultural questions are being raised, and they are being targeted against a female. character. So it is somehow a portrayal of the deep rooted patriarchy in the society. That is one point that the article has something new. So that's about this article. So before I conclude, I would like to tell you about some information regarding our institution. We are starting a UPSC Prelims cum Mains classes from the 6th of January 2018 at 10 a.m. We shall be covering all the basics, including the NCERT daily newspaper, prelims test series, and mains answer writing on a daily basis. So if you are interested, please get in touch with us. This is our address and this is our phone number. Also, I would request you to recommend about our program to your friends. So with this, I finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching this video and I hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.